our last session, an inside look at Bubble's bootstrapping journey between the founder of Do-Rag Festival and Meadry, Lisa Michelle, and our own co-founder, Emmanuel Straschnov.
All right. Can you hear me? All right. Hello, everybody. Like Madeline introduced, I am Lisa Michelle. I am a Bubble Immerse alum. So a few years back, I joined the program, had no experience with coding, but I came out of that with an MVP and 20,000 users bootstrapping. So I'm really, really excited to be sitting here with Emmanuel to talk about bootstrapping. So I'm just going to jump right in because I know people want to know. Why was it important for you to have a session here at Bubblecon about bootstrapping?
I think it comes down to two things. First of all, when we ask our users how they plan on funding their business, 80% of them say they want to bootstrap. So I think that's something very relevant for our audience. And also, I think Bubble is an enabler of bootstrapping, by reducing the cost of technology. And so these two things combined make it, like, I think, a pretty good topic.
Mm-hmm. And, I mean, that's a really surprising number, 80%.
Yeah.
And I know I'm in that number.
I mean, there is because Bubble reduces the cost of technology, there is somewhat of a selection bias, of course, which I'm very happy about. I mean, we started this company so that people could bootstrap more. And so that makes sense. It's a high percentage.
No, I love that. And I know people from different backgrounds, different situations have access to be able to build something and do some really powerful things. So I love that. Talking about, you mentioned that, it's not just that financial aspect. Can you tell us a little more, like, why did you choose to bootstrap Bubble? Like, there's a lot of different avenues, obviously, that you can take. Why bootstrap?
It's a long story, it was 7 years of bootstrapping for us. And so things have changed a little bit. It started a little bit because we wanted to have something more real to show before we could talk to investors. And then we started talking to some investors. We never found anyone that really clicked with what we were doing. Like, people, I don't know how much people remember, but no code was not hot at all in 2012 or 2013. First of all, the word did not exist. And second of all, it was all about teaching people how to code at that time, which was, I think, the way the tech world and VCs in particular were thinking about solving the problem we were trying to solve. And so we never found anyone with whom we would have a real click. And then over time, we started feeling that we were just better off ourselves by not bootstrapping. And we realized there are a few cons, but a lot of pros to bootstrapping. I'm sure we'll get into that later. And so we ended up working for us quite well. Now, frankly, I think we should have probably started fundraising a little bit sooner than we did. I think 7 years was a bit too long. But I also know that had we fundraised much sooner, we'd be out of business today. So.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if you can, like, elaborate. You said 7 years was too long. What were the indicators that you feel like is like, okay, we bootstrapped enough. Now it's time to go to another avenue?
It's just that I feel we could have moved a little bit faster, sooner. But it's like when you race a Formula One, you never go fast enough until you go too far fast enough until you go too fast and you go off track and then you're out of the race, right? So. After fundraising in 2019, especially given how the process went, it was fairly quick for us to fundraise at that time. I did think, okay, we probably should have done that a year or 18 months ago. But, first of all, it's better late than never. And it's also sometimes better too late than too early.
Okay, and I love it. Everyone is all eyes on us. I love it. So you've talked about in the past, right? Bootstrapping being more of a mindset in the past. What exactly is a bootstrapping mindset?
I think it comes down to, I don't know why we make such a big deal about bootstrapping, because it's really how business have been built for thousands of years at this point, is, just you don't invest resources you don't have yet. So the mindset is really, let's create something from nothing, get some money, because ultimately that's what you need, and some feedback from people, and make something bigger out of this. That's fundamentally the mindset. So in practice, what does this mean? That means focusing on things that can create money earlier than if you fundraise. Like monetization is something you need to think about sooner. Be careful with your resources and make sure you spend them on what's useful and wise. Be very scrappy. And think about ROI, return on investment, because money is your most limited investment. Once you get venture-backed, and particularly if you raise a lot of money, then it's different because ROI is still something very important that you should think about. But usually the investment is more time than resources because you have, by definition, way more resources in terms of money than the size of your business is, because you usually raise quite some money given the size of your business, given the way the system works. And so that's the difference of mindset that you have. I think it's a very healthy way to do that with bootstrapping. And again, not particularly new when you think about building businesses
And I
across
think
all industries.
that's true. Like, I've actually never heard it said like that, but when you think about it, it does make sense. Like, bootstrapping is not some out there concept. Like you said, it's...
No, I mean, the weird thing is fundraising. Being able to get like a lot of money from investors by selling them a very big vision. I mean, that started earlier than venture capital in the tech industry. I mean, that started... People say that Cristobal Columbus was the first startup entrepreneur, getting basically selling shares of what you would find in America. So selling something against the promise of something. But it's pretty late and pretty rare.
And when you say that too, like just the time investment, being able to like focus on one thing, I feel like with bootstrapping, there's obviously a lot of attention to creating the value because it's kind of like you have to, right? Versus, focusing on that VC route, a lot of effort is convincing people of the vision and what you're trying to build. Right.
I mean, the value you either way, on either path, you're going to create some value. With VCs, at first, you're going to have to create a perceived value of hope, of potential, or what you're going to do in the future. And then you have to be careful once you raise the money to get back into bootstrapping mindset, which is, let's create value for your customers. One of the advantages of bootstrapping is that you just focus on one thing. So in some ways, it's actually easier because you only think about one problem, which is how do I create something that is valuable to customers so that they pay me? Which is because one of the great advantages of bootstrapping is that you only have one type of people you deal with, which is your customers or users. At Bubble, we talk about users, but it's ultimately the same thing. When you fundraise, and you have different type of customers because your investors are not your customers, but in the first few years or at least quarters of the life of your company, you're going to report to them more than you report to your customers. Because if someone gives you a $100,000 check to invest in your company, and someone, like I think our first price point was $50, gives you $50 per month, you unfortunately will pay more attention to your investors than to your users. And it's something that many entrepreneurs can navigate, but it does bring some challenges that if you bootstrap, you don't have to do that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great segue to the next question. Thinking about, the landscape, right? What would you say are the pros and cons of bootstrapping? Obviously, there's a lot, but what comes to mind when you think about the pros and the cons?
So the pros, I've already said a few things. I think if I had to summarize to the most important one is it really helps you focus on one thing, which is make your customers happy enough so that they pay you. And not try to optimize for how some people that may not be your customers perceive you. And in our case, for instance, had we raised money sooner and much sooner, investors would have pushed us to do things that I know would have make us fail down the line. So that is the biggest value of bootstrapping, that in some ways it simplifies your life. Of course, there are a lot of things that need to happen. You need to be in a business where you can still generate money early on. Like if you try to bootstrap OpenAI, for instance, my understanding of how it works is that it's impossible because of the initial investment you have to put together to get something that you can sell. With what we do, that was not like particularly capital intensive. You can write code yourself. It's actually, you can do a lot of things for very cheap. It just means your team is going to be small. On the con side of bootstrapping, well, first of all, it limits your resources, so you're going to move slower. And at some point, I think it's important to be cognizant of this, and that's where I think we were a little bit too slow. It's like, okay, now we have a thesis where we know that if we raise some money, we can start accelerating and get more users and have the growth that you need to raise a subsequent round, because that's one of the things with fundraising. As soon as you fundraise once, it's very difficult to get out of it. And so you have to make sure you can have a business that is going to generate enough growth to attract investors for the next round. but you can move faster. The other thing, that one is a little bit different. I think one of the cons of bootstrapping, and I've seen that happen a few times is now, even around me at a personal level, is if you think about your career and your life as an entrepreneur, if you don't think about that as a business, but more like, am I doing the right thing with my time? We only have one life. One of the value of fundraising is that you have external people that can basically tell you every 18 months, okay, this is not working, do something else with your life. And sometimes it's easier to make the decision if it's someone from the outside telling you that. Because once you're in it, you always feel that you're going to keep, if you push another 6 months, you're going to get somewhere better, and ultimately, eventually, it's going to work. Bootstrapping, in particular, if you make like enough revenue to keep the business alive and pay yourself a little bit, there is a risk that I've seen people going through that, where you kind of stick with your idea for honestly too long. And after 7 years, you wake up and say, what do I have now? And you have a bootstrap business that is not necessarily what you were setting, what you wanted to do initially. So my biggest advice, and by the way, I mean, in some ways, I think Josh and I were close to being in that situation. We had an inflection point when we did the seed round in 2019 that then got accelerated with a subsequent round we did in 2021. But I think in 2018, 2017, there could have been a real track for us remaining a small business forever, which is not what I wanted to do with my life. Like, I've always been in this thing because I think there is an opportunity to create something really big, transformative, and to do that, you need scale. You cannot do that with 20,000 users, even though the technology you create is cool and people derive value from the product. And so one of my biggest advice when people tell me, no, I'm not fundraising, I want to bootstrap and everything, is I tell them, put in your calendar every 6 months a reminder to take a step back and ask yourself, okay, is this really what I want to do? Is this going as I want it to go? Is it realistic to think it's going to become what I was hoping to get initially in the near future? Because if you don't, then you can develop some bitterness, which again, it's not about the success of the venture. In fact, the venture might thrive that way as a small business, but for your personal life as an entrepreneur, that can be a challenging thing. Sorry, this is a little bit dark, but that's, I think, something important to keep in mind for this difficult decision, whether you fundraise or not.
No, I think that's great, and I was going to have a question about control, but I think you already kind of answered it. It's like, it's a two-sided coin. A lot of people talk about bootstrapping, being able to have this sense of control over what happens, but to your point, there's a dark side where you have too much control and you're not really pushing yourself to that next
because
level.
it is very hard to give up when no one else around you is telling you to give up, in particular when your customers are going to tell you to keep going because they depend on you most of the time. And so having like someone that has an external say they don't tell you to stop, but they tell you, look, I'm not going to give you more money. And at some point, because you got used to having more resources than the revenue you're making, is like, okay, that's probably the time I should stop. And again, I know some people that got into problems with that.
Okay, no, that's awesome. I want to kind of shift gears and talk about, strategy and decision making with bootstrapping. So, kind of, this is a great segue. How did you build a lean product at Bubble? A lean product, like being lean.
I mean, it comes out to be very cheap and being very careful about your resources. There's no secret to that. It's until a few months ago, maybe like a year ago or something, I would know what every transaction on our bank account was about. Like I'm still, and still today, I'm still very close to our financials and know this. And so you develop this habit of, just making sure you don't spend money stupidly. And the truth is, you can spend a lot of money stupidly. As soon as you start having an organization that scales and you start having multiple people, like there are many, many things you spend that are not useful. And so developing that, that's, I think, one of the important things. The other thing is that some of the decisions you're going to be making and some product decisions will be aimed at making revenue sooner than if you didn't have the issues. I think it's mostly a good thing because it forces you to create something that people want to pay for. It does make you make stupid decisions sometimes. So one of the things we did at Bubble is, of course, like the amount of features we need is almost endless, given that every user has a different use case in mind. And before we had the plugin system, we had to build those features ourselves. And so we would have people coming to us asking for features. And one of the things we were doing was basically asking them to pay. Like, we would call that sponsoring a feature. So you don't own the feature because then it's available to everyone. But basically, if you give us money, we'll change our priority list to do what you need sooner so that it unblocks you. I would say 50% of what we've built that way was actually not something we should have built and probably caused more problems down the line. So there are always, but you could say it's just poor judgment on my side on that one. But when actually you do need some money to make the business work, sometimes it does make you make stupid decisions.
No, that's interesting. And I know you say like poor decisions. Is there any kind of common theme around what would qualify as like poor decision? Is it like not focusing on creating value, or what would you kind of say is the theme?
I think it's really about making sure that whatever you're doing is in line with the long-term vision that you have. And I would say overall, we're still in business today. So I think most of the decisions we've made, like 70 or 80% of the decisions we've made during these bootstrapping years, were still moving us in the right direction. So we did fine. But there were a few times where it was probably too far in terms of the long-term vision that we had. The vision being here, not necessarily the vision of the company, but really the product vision that we had. Was the use case that this user was pitching us and wanted us to give us some money to help them build a particular feature so that they could get there? Was it what Bubble was built for? And there were a few times where clearly it was not.
That makes sense. The next question is a great segue. How important is early monetization?
I would say pretty high. I mean, it depends. It depends a lot on your business. If you're doing like a Tinder-like marketplace, like a dating app like a Tinder, you're going to have a hard time monetizing that at first. You need to create traction on both sides before you can actually have something to sell. I think if you create what I would call like a serious SaaS, it's very risky to go to market with something for free because it's not going to attract the right users. You don't have actually proof that people are willing to pay for it. And the feedback, and because you're not going to have the right users, the feedback you're going to get is not the right one. And so I think it's really important to monetize soon. That's one thing I think we actually did well, because we did start monetizing pretty much immediately. Our first paying customer was in December 2012. I probably have said that already in other places. It was actually a check, because we didn't have Stripe integration at the time, and I was actually very strict about receiving the check and cashing it in. Now, I probably feel like I should have kept it and framed it, but at that time, that's a bootstrapping mindset. I was not into that at all. I was just, let's cash it in, because we need that money to hit the bank account. And that ensured that most of the product decisions we were doing were done because of people that were deriving enough value from the product to pay us. Whether paying us too much, not enough, it's all, you don't know. But I think it's a little bit black and white, honestly. Like at some point, are people paying or not paying? If they're paying, maybe they're not paying the right amount. But the important thing is that they're paying.
No, that's good. Talking about monetization, obviously, like creating value is a core piece of that. What customer acquisition tactics worked for Bubble?
Still today, actually, word of mouth remains our best flywheel. That's one of the consequences that you have when you're bootstrapping, is that you don't have a ton of resources to invest into what they call like paid channels, or like marketing strategies that just generate a lot of traffic because you pay a PR agency, they put your name in some news outlet, and therefore you're going to have a lot of traffic immediately, which it's a great way to grow. I mean, it's still many companies are successful at that, and we use Google Ads ourselves, but it's something that really you can only do when you have resources and not where you find the best efficiency. We couldn't do that at the time, so everything we did had to be free for us. And so this came down to, well, in the very early years, we would find our customers ourselves going to events in New York, but that's a very early, not early years, like early months. And then over time, what we saw was working well, is creating a product that generates enough excitement among people so that they talk about it with their friends and they bring their friends. And for the longest time, actually, that's what was working very well. It is, when you make that work, it is a huge luxury, because suddenly your cost of acquisition is basically zero. I mean, the cost of acquisition that you have is creating a good product, but you don't really see that as a cost of acquisition. It's just like you building the product that you set to build, and users come for free. The challenge is that it cannot always go forever. At some point, it stops a little bit, and then you have to learn. And it's a phase we had to go through maybe 2-3 years ago, where we started being, okay, we still have that flywheel that's working, but at some point, you lose that early adopter, like acquisition, like where things would go very quickly because we were pretty small. And then you need to diversify your acquisition channels and particularly implement like costly strategies, like stuff that, not costly, not necessarily they're expensive, but stuff you have paid strategy, like where you have to pay. And then you have to start from scratch, which is why for us, the marketing team was the last team with the sales team that we built at Bubble. After all the teams, because for the first 8 years, we never felt like we had to do any marketing because things were just happening on their own. Another mistake we've made. We should have built a marketing team sooner, but that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, as a founder and like social media being, I think, one of the things that's free and accessible, from what I've heard, like most founders gravitate towards that because it's something that you can use and that's a resource that's free but has a lot of impact. So marketing is definitely key. I want to shift. We talked about the strategy and the decision making. I want to talk about the challenges. We talked about the pros and cons, but like specifically get into the nitty gritty, like what are the challenges for scaling? So how did you manage cash flow while you were bootstrapping?
Well, by being very close to your books and seeing where the money goes, paying yourself very little, and adjusting your salary basically on every month. Like, is it a good month or a bad month? Posing salary sometime when this is happening. There were like maybe one quarter where one of our bigger clients, so that's one of the things that enabled us to bootstrap, is that we actually found one bigger client that was paying us more than $50 a month, but was able enough to pay ourselves like what Paul Graham calls like a ramen salary. So you're not going to have a great lifestyle in New York, but you basically don't lose money if you have a small room and you don't go to expensive restaurants. And at some point, they were supposed to pay us. They stopped paying us, and after during 6 months, they're like, "Oh yeah, we're going to pay you. We're going to pay you." I sympathized with their problems because they were trying to raise a round that was not closing, so it was like challenging for them. And we got to a situation where we stopped paying ourselves and looking at both the company bank account going down because the operating cost of running Bubble was not very high, but still a few $1,000s a month at that time, which probably doesn't sound too much today, but for us, actually, like a burn rate of a few $1,000s a month was not nothing. This is early years, like this is like maybe 2014, something like that. And our own bank account was also going down because you still need to eat and live. And that's like, I would say we were, I don't know how close we were to effectively going out of business because then they paid us and that was fine. But we started, Josh and I started looking at each other and be like, okay, how long can this go? Like, this is getting a little bit scary. And so the way you have to manage your financials is be very reactive and flexible and don't let things happen without you noticing it. Now, if you just have 2 guys, we had like the most bare-bone version of bootstrapping at first, where it was just 2 guys. After that, we built a team of, I think, 15 people before we raised money. But when you just have 2 guys, it's actually pretty easy to know where the money goes, and you can be very careful. I think when you get to, and after when we were 15, still bootstrapping, we didn't go through like a difficult time like this, so we didn't have to do that. But if you start building a team and you're bootstrapping, that's where it gets difficult because some of the decisions you're going to have to make are going to be challenging for your employees. When it's 2 founders decided to stop themselves, that's fine. I mean, that's why we're here for. It's our job as founders to absorb, these shocks. But when you have a team, you can't really do that.
Okay.
Well, then you have to be very careful, sensitive to personal situations and everything, but at the same time, do what needs to be done for the business to survive.
I want to go back since we have time. You mentioned that you had like a user that was paying a little more than your average user, right? For a founder that's bootstrapping, I wonder if that for you at the time was like an indicator of that specific customer being your ideal customer and leaning more so or maybe prioritizing more so features that were relevant to them. Did that come up for you at all?
It's a tricky question to respond. So to give, without getting too specifics, the average customer at the time was paying us $50 was our very initial pricing, just put a random number. I think we were charging maybe $19 a month or something. So over a year, like 240. This customer was usually 5-digit and sometimes 6-digit per year. So like very different amounts. And so it was a confirmation for us that we were creating something actually very valuable because we had found one company that I don't know if they were our ICP because there are many things they were doing that were not exactly the right fit for us. Okay. But at the same time, it was a non-technical founding team, having raised serious amounts of money, like multi-million-dollar rounds of money, no engineering team, and needed a way to build a solution, and they were using us to do that. And so we're like, okay, we definitely created something that people are willing to pay a lot of money for because their value really Bubble, and at the time, Bubble was not what it is today. I mean, it was pretty early stage for us in terms of reliability and a lot of things. And they were still willing to pay a lot of money because that's basically what enabled their business. Whether there was a right, so I would say the way they were using our product was the right one. But when I said a lot of features that we would build over the years that were not actually necessarily super aligned with the long-term vision were also a lot because of this customer. And so I don't know if it was the right ICP. That being said, when I think about our last 13 years as a company, I'm extremely happy we made them. And without them, we wouldn't be existing today, even though they're not part of the Bubble world anymore.
Okay. I didn't ask it to be tricky. It was just interesting because I think you raise a good point about, I'm just thinking about the founder that's using Bubble and bootstrapping. Like if that were to come up, that would seem like it was an indicator, but I think you raised a good point about being able to really understand your customer enough and understand your vision to be able to see how that aligns for the long term. So I think that's really good. Okay. How did you build and scale your team?
For that?
How did you build and scale your team?
Well, slowly. That's what happens. I mean, it can happen that some business are bootstrapping and just get explosive success, and suddenly, millions of dollars are coming every month, and they can hire a ton of people. But most of the time, it's not going to work that way. And so you hire one person at a time, and you have to be very careful with how you grow the team because you cannot grow too fast. And so we started with the functions we already knew before. So we started with, I think, 2 engineers, success, and then kept adding there. Marketing, design, and sales came pretty late in our journey. And as I said, I think it was a mistake. I wish we had done that sooner. One of the challenges when you have limited resources, and by definition, if you bootstrap, you're going to have limited resources, is that it makes hiring mistakes costly because we just have room for one new engineer, so you have to hire them. And at the same time, it makes it very hard to make tough decisions when you have to make tough decisions about parting ways with someone, because suddenly you had one engineer and then you have no one, and you lose a redundancy. So that's one of the challenges that you have with limited resources, is that it makes building the team more challenging, and it makes it slower for you to iterate. If you raise a lot of money, then you hire 3 people, and you see who works out, who doesn't work out, and you're going to move faster. One thing that I think Josh and I have to recognize is that just being the 2 of us for 5 years made us pretty bad recruiters at first. Like it was very difficult for us to know who was good, who was not good. And we were at the same time constrained by the number of people we could hire, and so we had to iterate on the team and get the right team that we wanted slowly, probably too slow.
That makes me think.
But
oh, go ahead.
the thing. Anyway, you always work under limited resources, right? And so under constraint, and so I don't necessarily think it's a reason not to be bootstrapping your business to have to go to what I just described. That's part of the deal. But there are many advantages also to bootstrapping.
Yeah, we've talked about like the bootstrapping mindset. Is there any sort of like mindset you have to adapt? I imagine that there is, but I wonder what are the differences, or how do you balance it when you talk about scaling a team and thinking about what to prioritize and all the things you just described? You mean
between the bootstrapping phase and the scaling phase?
Right.
So scaling, assuming you raise some money at that point?
Right, and building a team and like what are the differences?
So the mindset is pretty different. In one case, you wait to see how much money you're going to make. At some point, you get smart enough to know, especially in SaaS, because it's easier. Okay, we made that much money this month, so we know roughly how much we're going to make next month. Well, and then you plan your spend based on that. While on the other time, you suddenly you have, I don't know, 5 years of revenue that are basically given to you because you sold some shares of your company when you raise money, and you have to think about making big plans with this money. And over a pretty short period of time, by the way, because it's usually what, maybe 2 to 18 months to 3 years, the money that usually people use to deploy the capital they've raised. So the mindset is very different. In one case, you're like you manage your family financials, like you look at how much money and how much you can spend on different things. Well, when you're scaling, you start making big plans, and it takes different judgment, different way to think, different way to take risks, and it's something that I think I've personally struggled with at first. I think now it's getting a little bit better, but after raising our first round, I was still in the mindset, let's be careful, let's not lose money stupidly and everything, and that does get in your way of making bolder investments and taking risks. Today we're getting better, even though in the way we do things, I still sometimes we try to be conservative on the financial side, which often is the right thing to do, but can also get in your way of growing a little bit faster. Another thing that I noticed was pretty challenging, so it's more about building the team, so not necessarily the mindset of the founders, but mindset as a whole for the company is the type of people that get attracted by your company as a bootstrapping entity versus a scaling startup, especially a fast growth startup, hiring a lot of people. These people are different. And so one of the things that we had to deal with is when we built the initial team of 0 to 15 people, or 13 people, not including Josh and I, where we were bootstrapping. And at that point, at least at the beginning, maybe not for the last 3 or 4 people, because at that time we already had started thinking, okay, maybe we'll raise a round. We're pretty set on keeping it that way for some time. Is that then we raised the round, and suddenly we had to think, how are we going to be investing money, take more risk? How are we going to be changing how we operate? And some of the early people we had did not like that. And the people that would join us after the round, where we were officially like a VC-backed startup, which is kind of a phrase you hear sometime, right? Were different. And so culturally, we had a little bit of challenges. And so some people end up leaving because of that, not being happy with the way we're doing things. And that's okay. But when it happens, it's a little bit painful.
Okay. No, I think that's awesome. I had a question, but it left my mind. I want to, we have a little more time here. I want to kind of summarize everything we talked about, and I think that'll kind of spark my mind. We first talked about just bootstrapping and what that looks like. I think you brought up some really good points about focusing on the customer and customer centricity. What does that look like, or what would you say are like the top 2 things? Everyone always says top 3. The top 2 things that a bootstrapped founder should focus on when people say focus on the customer? Because a lot of times it's very vague, but I wonder if you have any like specific items that you would say.
I mean, I don't know if it's something, the 2 things that come to mind to me are not necessarily for like bootstrapping founders versus a founder that has raised capital to launch their venture. So I guess I'll respond to that first, and then we see if you want me to add something about the specifics, something specific about bootstrapping, the bootstrapping case. I think it comes out to really launch early and gather feedback. The 2 things, and by the way, I'm not the first one to say that. I don't think there is anything too new with this, but I do think, and at the same time, gather feedback from customers, but don't necessarily launch too soon either with a big splash. That's one mistake that I've seen often people do when they want some social validation from the press and everything because they think it's going to bring a lot of users. You have to do that when you think your product is ready to attract and to retain customers. And if you do that too soon, then it's a missed opportunity. But you have to put your product in the hands of people as soon as possible and really listen to what people say. It sounds obvious, but in practice, it's not easy to do. And at the same time, do that keeping your product vision, because at the very beginning, people might not totally understand what you're trying to do, and then the feedback you're going to have are not necessarily going to be relevant for what you do. So you have to use your judgment at first. But over time, as the product gets more real, then you can start listening to users more blindly about what they want and not want. And in infinity, like the very end stage where you created something that is exactly what you want and users understand what you want, what you built, then basically whatever the customer is going to say is going to be right. It's not necessarily true at first, and that's that phase that is a little bit that we need to navigate. And then for Bootstrap founders, I mean, be careful with money. I mean, it comes down always to that at the end of the day. Like bootstrapping is a financial concept, so be careful with your resources because you need them to survive.
No, I love that. We are coming up on time now, so I want to thank you. I think that this was a great conversation, as you kind of already iterated, thinking about your resources, but adapting that mindset around bootstrapping to build something valuable and scalable. And Bubble is an amazing platform to do that. Do you have any final words before we close out? Final words?
No, I mean, I'm very happy we talk about this because we live in a world where, you know, bootstrapping became kind of a thing like a few years ago, and people talk less about it these days. And I still think this is really not necessarily the right way to build a business, but a way that everybody should consider, and everybody should think: do they want to go through the VC route that is a little bit intense and might make you make wrong decisions because again you have to please investors, or do you want to build a business really focusing on one problem, which is solve the problem of your customers. And so I'm glad we're talking about this. I hope that people see Bubble as a tool to get there and to really start things and really nail the value proposition sooner at a cheaper cost, because if we can enable people to build more things for a cheaper cost, we basically unleash a ton of economic potential because people are not constrained anymore by fundraising. And yeah, then people don't have any excuse to try and launch the ventures, which is, I think, what I'll end on. You know, you don't have any excuse not to do anything.
Great. I think that's a perfect way to close it. Thank you so much, and thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you.